Good morning, everyone. Today is Tuesday, May 25th, 2021. My name is Karen Bodenschatz, and I serve as Associate Pastor at First Lutheran Church in Onalaska, Wisconsin, and this is my morning musing. So I follow some folks on Instagram. I follow on Instagram, my friend on Facebook. I follow some folks on Instagram who have been raising up profiles of Asian Americans, especially in the wake of the violence that we're seeing against Asian Americans for reasons that are beyond my own understanding. And so I was really fascinated with the story of this one woman, and I wanted to share that with you as a way to increase our own awareness of these different stories that we never get a chance to hear. And even as someone who grew up in California, although it was in Southern California and not in San Francisco where this person lived and did most of her work, I would have expected that I would have heard her story, especially when we studied what happened during World War II. So I'm going to tell you the story of Katsu Tagasaki. And then I will try to remember to link below the link to this particular version of her story told by the National Park Service, so you can read the full of it, because I'm not going to be able to read all of it to you, but I'm going to give you a snippet. So Dr. Kazu Takasaki was one of the first Japanese American women to become a doctor in the United States. She was born and raised in San Francisco. She delivered over 10,000 babies in her long career, serving the Japanese American population in San Francisco. She was strong-willed, brave, and always stepped up for her community. Dr. Takasaki is an incredible gem in the history of San Francisco, and I would say in the history of our country. So she was born in 1897 in San Francisco, and her parents had immigrated to San Francisco a few years before she was born. She was one of 8 children, and she was described by her family as strong-willed. I would know nothing about that. Her parents, I said that right. Her father had studied to be a lawyer in Japan, but was not allowed to practice law in the United States, so he ran a successful business. As a child, Tagasaki was forced to switch elementary schools because of segregation against Japanese Americans. And when she was 9 years old in 1906, she saw her city, San Francisco, decimated by an earthquake and fires. She said of the experience, "I remember we got dressed and walked from our house to 14th and Church, where there was a hill, and that afternoon and for 2 days in the daytime, we sat watching the city burn." But after that happened, her mother helped turn their church into a makeshift hospital. And so as a child, Tagasaki helped at the hospital by taking care of the wounded. And this experience that she had as a child inspired her and much of her family to go into medicine. So she received a degree in zoology from Stanford, but could not find work as a Japanese woman in San Francisco. So she was accepted into a nursing program at the Children's Hospital, finished top of her class, but even with this accomplishment, she still could not be hired. She would say, "They had accepted me in the program, but I still couldn't work here. The climate in San Francisco was that they just didn't use Japanese nurses. The staff wouldn't have it." So she left San Francisco and she went to medical school in Philadelphia. And after receiving her degree in 1933, she moved back to San Francisco where she started a practice. She also bought a home and began to build a life for herself. And all 5 of her younger siblings followed in her footsteps and became a part of the medical field. And of course, we know that in 1941, on December 7th, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. It was a horrific event, but our response to that event was also not, I'm going to say horrific. And that was when Franklin D. Roosevelt issued the Executive Order 9066, which allowed for the Western Defense Command to create zones where enemy aliens could not go. For example, the Japanese. And they actually were rounded up, 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry, whether or not they were actually born in America, were rounded up and put into camps. If you want to hear more about this, I encourage you to listen to a podcast with David Tennant interviewing George Takei. It was pretty amazing. So she and her family had very short notice, had to gather up all of their things on March 2nd. They were allowed 2 suitcases, and there were assembly areas that held everybody. And Dr. Takasaki was, she set up medical facilities because the conditions were horrible. And she organized the Japanese American medical professionals that found themselves there and created a medical center that would care for people. She delivered 50 babies in the first month that she was there. And then because she had such good success, she was moved around to other camps to do the same thing. But when she returned home in 1944, or in 1943, at the end of 1943, she returned to her home in San Francisco, which had basically been destroyed. She continued, though, to serve her community for 40 years. She had a reputation for caring for others, even if they didn't have the financial means to pay her. She was named one of the most distinguished women of 1970 by the San Francisco Examiner. And after a long career, Dr. Takasaki passed away in 1992 at the age of 95. We give thanks to God for her witness and for her strength and for her inspiration to the generations that have followed her, and now to me, and hopefully to